The Daily Mail wrote with horror this weekend that whilst ISIS were murdering innocent people in Paris, locally in Bedford, a panel of Muslims discussed their desire to one day see the establishment of an Islamic State. To quote their headline, radical panellists at Quiz a Muslim event demanded establishment of an Islamic State in Britain as jihadists went on bloody rampage through Paris. Well, amongst the panellists that evening was Dili Hussein, a Bedford Muslim who works for the Five Pillars website, a website which seeks to help people better understand Islam and its place here in the UK. Last night, she told my colleague Roberto Perroni why the event at the Bedford Corn Exchange had been organised.
The main objective was to allow both Muslims and non-Muslims to have a very open, robust and objective Q&A with a number of panellists on the most burning and pressing issues relating to Islam and the Muslim community, and to discuss all those hot, sticky, uncomfortable topics like ISIS, what is a caliphate, Sharia law, jihad, Western foreign policy, topics which in this day and age, unfortunately, many Muslims are worried to talk about because they fear being labelled extremists. And that's really what it was. The main objective was to clarify any misconceptions that may exist amongst non-Muslim Bedfordians, and to actually help educate Muslims if they felt that they struggled answering any of these topics.
Dili told Roberto that the fact the group had met whilst the terror attacks began in Paris was totally coincidental, and that the only reason this issue never came up was that nobody in the room had checked their mobile phones, so they had no knowledge of the attacks until much later that evening. He also explained that whilst everyone on the panel condemned the crimes committed by ISIS, they do, however, all agree it would be positive for many Muslims if one day we saw the establishment of an Islamic State governed under Sharia law, or as Dili says, God's law.
I can't speak on behalf of 1.6 billion Muslims, but what I can say is that a caliphate is integral part of Islamic history. We had one for more than 1,300 years, and to see the return of such a polity is not a strange or fringe opinion amongst Muslims. It is something that has been prophesied by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So it's not a strange concept. It's just a concept that's been tarnished and bastardized. But what I'm assuming from my interaction from a number of Muslims, from the grassroots as well as some organizations, is that what they're saying is for a society which is governed by God's law is something that's more desirable than a secular liberal democracy. However, that doesn't say that they can't live in a secular liberal democracy, because they are living in a secular liberal democracy. They are living as peaceful, tax-paying, law-abiding citizens.
Bedford Muslim Dili Hussein there. Well, my colleague Roberto also asked Dili where this new Islamic State or caliphate would be, if not here in the UK.
I wouldn't say. I mean, that's something I'd perhaps Tajir or Hizb ut-Tahrir can answer. But when they say Muslim world, I'm guessing that's somewhere, anywhere from Morocco to Indonesia, I guess.
Well, in just a moment, we'll hear from Douglas Murray. He's Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society. He also writes for The Spectator and comments on many social and political issues, including Islamism. But first, before we hear from Douglas, Roshan Salih is editor of the Five Pillars website, and he joins me now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Morning. So, do you feel then that some British Muslims would rather live in an Islamic state under Islamic law rather than in our own British liberal secular democracy?
Yeah, I think some might. But it's difficult. We're a 3 million strong, very diverse community, which includes Shias, Sunnis, Barelvis, Deobandis, apolitical Muslims, political Muslims. So we can't generalize. I think some probably would, although I think they feel that there isn't a proper Islamic state anywhere in the world. But the fact is that most British Muslims are happy to stay put in this country, and most British Muslims are very appreciative of this country and what it's offered them.
But you see, that's the concern, isn't it? There may be people listening to the programme thinking, well, That's ridiculous. I mean, there are so many people in the world who would love to live in this country and who appreciate the things that this country has to offer. How sad if a group of people...
Look,
well, no, hang on. Let me make the point before you laugh. How sad that there are some people who would rather live in a country with a completely different law of governance.
Look, there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people of British origin, white British people living in countries all over the world. British people, why are you singling out Muslims? Non-Muslims as well like to live abroad. They like to spend a lot of time abroad. They appreciate different cultures and countries, and then often they come back to the homeland.
But for example, if I moved to Argentina, for example, and wanted to live there, then I would have to just accept the way that things are in Argentina, and I wouldn't want to try and change their laws or their methods of dealing with their lives in Argentina.
No one's trying to change British laws. Where'd you get that idea from?
But wouldn't you rather, ultimately, I mean, let me ask you this direct question, would you rather Britain was governed by Islamic law? God's law?
Myself, personally?
Yeah.
No, I think it has to be done by consensus. I think that ultimately Muslims are a minority in this country. So it would be ridiculous for this country to be governed by Islamic law. Islamic law, wherever it happens in the world, if it happens, must be can't be imposed by force. It must be only enacted through consensus of people living in that society.
What would be the benefits? Just explain to those of us that don't know an awful lot about Islam, what would be the benefits of living under Islamic law?
Well, I think for Muslims, it's a basic thing of living in a country which is governed according to their beliefs, which is ultimately the Quran. Muslims believe that the Quran is the word of God, and they believe the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet, are a code of life to be followed. So I think Muslims, the attraction is that Muslims would be able to live according to their own values and wouldn't have to perhaps compromise on their values, such as living in this country, for example. I'll give you a direct example. There's something called usury or interest in the banking system. That's something that is prohibited for Muslims. But it's a fact of everyday life in this country. If you want to buy a house, if you want to get a credit card or whatever, you have to deal in usury. And things like that make Muslims feel very uncomfortable. But the thing is that ISIS and the Taliban and others have, kind of tarnished the conception of an Islamic state in the eyes of Muslims and non-Muslims, to be honest. And therefore, non-Muslims especially have a very kind of tabloidized, kind of tabloid view of what an Islamic state really is.
And how would women be treated
in an Islamic state? Well, women will be treated according to Islamic law, which accords them the rights according to Islamic law. I think I'm not an Islamic scholar, so I can't give you chapter and verse on this, but I think that obviously an Islamic conception of gender relations is different to a Western conception of gender relations. But when the Prophet Muhammad came along, women were treated like cattle. They were buried as infants. And when Islam came along, the rights were given to women like never before in history. They could own their own property. They could work. They weren't simply the property of men. But that said, I think there is a lot of sexism, and there is a lot of sexism in the Muslim world, and we have a lot of kind of ground to make up there, and we can perhaps learn from Western countries.
What about gay people? How would gay people be treated in this ideal Islamic world?
Homosexuality is considered a sin in Islam, so I think in an Islamic state, homosexuality would be illegal. I think there's no doubt about that. But at the same time, the Islam that I know does not persecute minorities. It doesn't encourage violence against minorities.
And do you think there are British...
Sorry, no. Let me finish my point, because I don't want your readers to get a tabloid understanding of this homosexuality issue, which is very dangerous. So let me finish my sentence.
Okay.
Basically, Islam teaches that homosexuality is a sin, and therefore in any Islamic state it would definitely be illegal. But again, that is something that is not controversial in Muslim countries and Muslim society. But I would say that, Islam does not legislate what people do in the privacy of their own homes. It only legislates when people do stuff in public, and that is considered a threat to the the very fabric of society itself.
The point I was going to make was, you're saying that there are members of the Muslim community in the UK that would like to live under that law, that ultimately, as you've just said, would consider homosexuality a crime.
Listen. Islamic law and Islamic culture and history is a very deep tradition. And I personally resent tabloid journalists and journalists like yourself reducing it to an issue of chopping off hands, how they'll treat gays, how they'll treat...
I'm sorry, these are important issues that need to be raised.
No, but they're incendiary topics, and there is a place to talk about them. But what I want to...
No, these are happening. These are happening. If you look at...
What I want to say to you is you cannot reduce a deep tradition like Islam to a few incendiary topics which are not palatable by Western liberals. That would be like reducing Western civilization to the Spanish Inquisition or the Iraq War. It's pure tabloid journalism.
This is a Western country. People who hold Western beliefs in this country surely are absolutely within their rights to raise concerns about the treatment of homosexuals in Islam, the treatment of women in Islam. That is absolutely reasonable.
But I said that. But that is not my point.
But I object to you telling me. I object to you telling me that I'm some kind of journalist that is really not worthy of speaking to you, and you don't want to even respond to that point because
you're putting. I have responded to that point. You're putting words in my mouth. All I'm saying is that these concerns are raised over and over again in interviews that I do and other Muslim activists do.
Maybe it's because they're very important issues.
And non-Muslim journalists like you need to look at Islam holistically. You need to educate yourselves about what Islam is and what Islamic history is, and not just concentrate on a few incendiary topics where you can score points in tabloid interviews.
So as far as you're concerned, just so we all understand, you personally wouldn't want to live under Islamic law, but you recognise there are lots of Muslims...
I'm an international citizen of the world. I could live under Islamic law. I can live under secular law. That's me personally. I like diversity.
But can I just ask then, if ultimately there are many, many Muslims in this country who would like to live under Islamic law, wouldn't it be fair to say there are countries in the world that are much more Islamic than Great Britain?
Of course.
So if somebody...
they should go there.
Well, exactly. That was the point I was going to make. If you really feel that the laws of this country are so at odds with beliefs that you have yourself, then why stay here? As you say, we're all citizens of the world. We can move around.
Personally, I do agree with you on that point. I think that there is some hypocrisy amongst certain Muslim activists who go on about... who criticise Britain all the time, like Anjan Chowdhury, for example, and they've got nothing to say about this country whatsoever. Yet they benefit from what this country has given them. I think they are hypocrites, and they should try to find somewhere else to live personally. But their argument would be there is no Islamic state in the world. Islamic countries in the world have been colonised, they're the victims of colonised and raping and pillaging by Western nations. So they're all secular regimes, or they're all kind of perversions of Islam. So they would say there's nowhere else to go.
If it's one set of laws from God, why should we bother deciding what bits we object to and what bits we don't? Surely we must take them as a whole. That's exactly what some Muslims want, to take the laws as a whole.
But what I'm saying is you can't understand Islamic rulings on issues such as apostasy or homosexuality or gender relations without understanding the foundations of Islam itself. That would be like kind of trying to you're kind of focusing on the symptoms and not the cause. I basically think that no one who doesn't really understand Islam or have a basic understanding of Arabic or Islamic history and culture, and especially religion, I don't think really they have their opinion on stoning to death or adulterers or homosexuality. I don't think it's worth the paper it's written on. Their opinion's worth nothing.
What, even if some of those people would like those rules to be in this country?
I don't see anyone calling for that. To be honest, I think this is one of the misconceptions of the Quiz the Muslim Night. I wasn't there, but from the people that I've spoken to, no one called for an Islamic state in Britain. This is something that exists in the imaginations of people like Douglas Murray, the Henry Jackson Society.
Well,
no one's calling for an Islamic state in Britain.
You've just mentioned him.
In the Muslim world.
You've just mentioned him. Let me bring him in because I'm sure he's been waiting very patiently, and I will come back to you for a response later if you'd like to make one. Douglas Murray is Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society and writes for The Spectator. Good morning to you, Douglas.
Morning, good to be with you.
Good morning, nice to have you with us. What do you make of what you've just heard, and what do you make of the fact that apparently lots of Muslims would like an Islamic state, not necessarily in the UK, but they would like a pure, proper Islamic state somewhere in the world, and those that want to live under that could then go and live in that particular part of the world?
Well, firstly, can I respond to some things that have been said? First of all, in your interview with Dilly Hussain, Dilly said that the event in Bedford was to clarify and assist people's understanding of Islam. It was really no such thing. And any Muslim, apart from anything else, knows that. If you look at the lineup of speakers was so totally unrepresentative of British Islam that it's laughable to pretend that it was there to assist. It was a propaganda event. It involved many of the most prominent fundamentalists in the UK. It promoted an exceptionally narrow version of Islam, an exceptionally fundamentalist version of Islam. It was clearly not to either clarify or assist. And when Dilly Hussain says that he can't speak on behalf of 1.3 billion Muslims, he's absolutely right. The problem is that people like him so often pretend that they do. As for Roshan's point, he says himself he's not an Islamic scholar and then goes on to say that he doesn't respect the opinions of anyone who isn't an Islamic scholar. So we can absolutely disregard his own opinion by his own terms as being not worth listening to. But just to add some things that are not opinion, but are just what we used to call facts. The situation is that everywhere that Islamic law, Sharia law, is instituted and has been instituted, women are regarded as second-class citizens by law. All people who are not Muslims are regarded as second-class citizens by law. Apostasy is punishable by death, and homosexuality is also punishable by death. And this isn't just a historical matter. This is what happens in all states in the world today where Islamic law is introduced. So I think you ask the perfectly pertinent and very important question. Because when people in the UK who are either Muslim or non-Muslim find out that radicals and fundamentalists are gathering to promote an exceptionally narrow and fundamentalist version of Islam, they are right to be concerned. And I would say on behalf of most Muslims in Britain and the vast majority of non-Muslims, that if people do not like British law and would prefer Islamic law, they are welcome to go to the countries in the world that are practicing that law. They may not practice it as perfectly as some of the fundamentalists would like, but it's much nearer than Britain. So they can go to the paradise of the Islamic State and see how equal rights work there, and rights for gays and rights for women. And if they think that's a bit too hardcore, they're welcome to go to Saudi Arabia and try their luck. But we have to realize what these people are and realize how anti-British they are. They are against most British non-Muslims and they are against most British Muslims.
The fact then that we are told many Muslims in Britain would rather like to live under that law, that should be a concern, should it?
Of course it's a concern. It's a concern whenever there's any group of people, however large or small, who think that the laws of the land are laws they would like to fundamentally change. But I think that it's true these people are a minority within a minority in Britain. Most Muslims around the world in Britain rather, came to Britain from around the world in the last 60 years because they were actually escaping the countries which are trying to practice the kind of Islamic law we've heard about today. They came to Britain to escape those horrific, barbaric, backwards laws. And it is one of the strangest paradoxes of our time that in many cases, people who are the children or grandchildren of people who came to the UK precisely to escape that system of law now spend their time trying to institute the system of law their parents and grandparents understandably fled from.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, I mean, there are always crazy people in the world. There are always fundamentalists. There are always totalitarians. There are always extremists. I'm sorry that we have this particular problem at the moment. It's not the first type of extremism we've had to deal with in the UK. But I think, as I say, that as a nation, we can be very confident of the fact that Most British people do not want to murder gays. Most British people do not regard women as chattel and second-class citizens. And by the way, let me just correct your non-Islamic scholar's comment on that. It is true that Muhammad instituted some laws for women which were fairly progressive for 7th century Arabia. They are certainly not progressive in 21st century Europe. Not at all. So most people in Europe and most people in Britain don't want to kill the gays. They don't want to regard women as second-class citizens. They don't want to regard people from other ethnic and religious minorities as second-class citizens. They don't want people who are born into a Muslim family but choose to leave the religion to be killed. They don't want any of this. We like our law. We like British law. We like the law of liberal democracies. We're going to keep it. And we will just have to keep an eye on these crazy people, the Five Pillars nutters, the Dili Hussein, the fundamentalists, the people who in Bedford the other night formed a kind of Islamist fundamentalist version of Celebrity Strictly Come Dancing. We will keep our eye on them, and we know that they won't win.
Douglas, let me, because it's only fair, having just made particularly that last comment, let me bring Roshan Salih back in, who's the editor of the Five Pillars website.
Yeah.
I guess you'd like to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, before I've got loads of points on it, but I would like to ask Douglas Murray a question. Could he please recite Surat al-Fatiha in Arabic, which is any Muslim child with a basic knowledge of Islam will be able to recite that surah fluently. Could he do it now, please, live on air?
You just said, Roshan, you just said you didn't care for the views of anyone else. So
you can't do it, can you?
Need to listen to me, and I don't need to listen to you. You said by your own standards, Roshan, that you don't listen to the scholars or anyone else. So why would you listen to me? Of course you will not. Of course you will not.
He can't recite Surah Al-Fatiha.
You're going to do a deflection tactic because you've already tried it throughout your interview.
You're an expert at that, aren't you?
You've been trying throughout your interview to pretend that what is in the Quran and what is in the Hadith, which anyone can read there or in any history books, is not there. You're not a scholar, you are a fundamentalist.
I don't want to speak to you. Can I speak to the presenter, please? All right. What that
to be fair, you did just involve Douglas. I was going to have a separate conversation with the two of them, but with the two of you, but you did just ask him a question.
Douglas Murray refused to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, which any Muslim child with no knowledge of Islam can recite. That means that he is unable to do that. That means he is completely ignorant about Islam, and therefore he should not be allowed on any TV program or any radio show.
Was I the one who didn't know what was in your Quran?
He has no right.
Was I the one who didn't know what your prophet said?
Now,
was I the one who didn't even know what your prophet said and did? No, that was you.
I didn't interrupt you, Mr. Murray. Can I just say...
It was you who didn't know what your own prophet said. It was you who didn't know what your own prophet said.
You're just ignorant about Islam. You can't recite Surah Al-Fatiha. That's shameful.
You said yourself you're not a scholar. You don't know anything. There's no reason why we need to listen to you.
There's no reason
why we need to listen to you. You said so yourself.
I've just embarrassed you in public. You're just lashing out now. Let me make my points and then...
very briefly, because we're coming up to the news, so make it in 20 seconds, if you would.
Yeah, basically, the meeting was misrepresented. No one called for an Islamic State. Dili Hussein and the panelists are not representative of British Islam. Of course they're not. But they were there to answer questions. There were non-Muslims there. They had the opportunity to ask questions. I think they did. Douglas Murray should not be allowed on TV or radio because he really knows nothing about Islam, as I just proved.
Okay, well...